We were associated with innovators working in the AMR space. So then we applied for the CARB-X GAN accelerator network, quite an exhaustive application. It was, Sachin, I can tell you, it was probably not as tough as asking for funding for PDs, but it was thing. And then there was a presentation, and we realized that it was a good opportunity for us to, grow to the next level in the AMR space. So as part of, and then when we got selected, of course, we had several rounds of presentations and all before we got, CCAM got selected. And we also had to then, interacted with the CARB-X people on what CCAM could do and would do. We had primarily, if I had to put it, 3 main mandates. One was to increase the awareness of CARB-X funding and increase the pipeline of applicants for funding from India, because India is obviously very vulnerable in terms of AMR, and would be good to have a lot of products there. So one was to increase the pipeline. The second was to for applicants who would be applying for CARB-X funding. Before this, let me just step back, because there might be some people who may not be aware of CARB-X or have very this thing. CARB-X is the largest public-private partnership organization that funds, they have, I'm sure Sachin will tell us more, but they fund projects or ideas in the AMR space. They have a very specific mandate. They focus mainly on escape pathogens. They are based in on the Boston University campus, and their funders include BARDA, include Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, include the German government, and several others. So the mandate for us was to increase the pipeline of startups, that could this thing, to handhold and guide these startups or innovators on how to fill in the application. There were 2 types of applications that need 2-step, I would say. And then also to help them, if they get selected in the for shortlisting, to help them on how to present and pitch for the funding calls. So that was a thing. And when I say this, it also included making people more aware of what CARB-X's scope is and what they would fund. So it's mainly awareness, and then supporting the startups to apply for funding and giving them all kinds of support for that. It also includes things like, when a product developer is funded, if there are areas, any areas, it could be clinical, or it could be intellectual property, or it could be regulatory. If there are specific domain areas where CCAM has some strengths and can contribute to a product development, product developers, in that domain, to provide that assistance as well. Swati?
Yeah, thanks, Nandita. Thanks for sharing the details with us. And Sachin has been, one of the first, I think, who's worked closely with CCAM also while applying for the grant. And must say that one of the very few from India to have received the grant. So firstly, let's try to understand about the work of Module Innovations. What are they doing exactly in AMR, and how does it align with CARB-X's mandate? Sachin?
Sure. So thanks, Swati, and thanks, Nandita. And really glad that the topic of AMR has come up. Of late, it has gained attention because of the COVID scenario. We've realized that a lot of antibiotic abuse didn't happen. And of course, there was no evidence. So thanks to CCAM for raising this. Now, as you mentioned, our association, Modules Association with CCAM dates back. And if I take from the credentials of Nandita that she had worked with ABLE, I applied, as a student when in the ABLE BEST. And from there, the journey of Module Innovations per se started. Since then, the focus of the company was always into diagnostics. And back then, it was into bacterial detection again. Gradually, we moved into the space of urinary tract infection. basis like some of the incidents that happened closely, and we understood that this is a grave problem to be solved. While I talk about what the diagnostic scenario was back then and what it is as of now, we still feel that diagnosing a UTI or sort of, giving a treatment for UTI is all symptomatic. If I talk about the OPD scenarios, it's mostly symptomatic. So we wanted that this symptomatic treatment and prescription of antibiotics should be backed by evidence. And that is where we started to develop a product which is called as uSense. So uSense is, it looks very similar to what a pregnancy test looks like, and the outputs are also something similar, but it identifies 4 major uropathogens that are causing UTI. So it's like a few drops of urine goes into the device, and by seeing few lines in a time frame of 15 minutes, you can identify that, okay, this is the pathogen which is causing a UTI in this particular patient. Now, as we moved further into this journey, we also realized that we need to come up with a holistic solution. Of course, identification of a significant bacteriuria is important. Identification of the pathogen species is important. But eventually, when you move to a higher setting like a hospital or a community hospital, you also need to have faster means of identifying the antibiotic susceptibility pattern. And that's where actually we started thinking on the lines of developing a product which is called as AST Sense, and which is exactly what CARB-X has funded. So AST Sense is actually, the size of an inkjet printer. So it has a very small footprint, but it identifies against a panel of 15 antibiotics, that which is the most effective antibiotic. Of course, it gives the MIC in a time frame of just 2 hours. So right now we are focusing on 4 major uropathogens. So they are the major cause of UTI, like E. coli, Klebsiella, Pseudomonas, and Enterococci. And this is right now what we claim as one of the fastest tests in the world, which is a phenotypic test, but gives the antibiotic susceptibility profile against a panel of 15 antibiotics in just 2 hours. So that's where like model innovation has been into this space of right now it is completely focusing on the problem of UTIs, because we know that it is a big problem affecting 150 million people globally. And all that we are trying to develop is something which is simple to use and could be deployed the lowest healthcare setting. So this exactly is what model innovation is into, and that's how we have our role in the complete picture of AMR. Swati.
Thanks, Sachin, for detailing that out. And we know, Nandita, that there are various profiles and different innovations that we consider as part of the CARB-X funding round. So could you just tell audience here that what kind of innovations would you be looking for from India as part of this program?
Yeah, sure. So CARB-X has their main focus, as I mentioned, on the escape pathogens. And related to that, until now, until about a few months ago, they had 4 major categories under which they would seek funding. And those are the categories that even CCAMP would obviously look for because they align perfectly with what CARB-X wants. And these 4 categories are in the vaccines and biotherapeutics space. They could be preventive antibodies as well. They are in the diagnostics space, the diagnostics to maybe rapidly sort of identify the bacterial species, or it could be a susceptibility, antibiotic susceptibility test as well. The third category are what CARB-X calls, or we say, is the direct acting small molecules, small antibiotic molecules. This is if somebody is developing a new class or a new target. So these are primarily the categories and type of innovation so that we would look for while preparing them or identifying them for the CARB-X funding. And of course, I think I missed the non-traditional approaches. So there is also funding available for non-traditional approaches, any alternate, right? Like we talk about microbiome or phage therapy, things like that. So any innovator, so the other thing I might want to mention here is that while CARB-X funds companies, but they also do fund innovators or researchers, there are certain conditions that apply, which we will talk on some other day. But just wanted to mention that they would fund individuals as well, but there are some conditions, like they need to be associated with an institute and some other conditions like that.
Okay, thanks, Nandita. I think that covers a wide variety of innovations that can potentially be supported and would be of interest for innovators, across the spectrum. And Sachin, we know that module innovations applied under the diagnostics category. And, I was just looking at the report, and there were 92 projects funded out of a total of 1163, which were submitted and potentially reached a stage in the 8 funding rounds. So I would like to understand from you, and this would also be very helpful to our participants here, that why did you choose to apply to CARB-X? And can you briefly tell us what really CARB-X looks for while evaluating a project for funding, and how did you prepare, personally as well as at an organizational level for this evaluation?
Right. So yes, a very, very interesting question. We came to know of CARB-X, if I remember correctly, when WorkWorks came into news. So I would be honest there that when they received the CARB-X funding, we came to know that there is a body which is called as CARB-X. Now, when we started to understand what kind of projects they fund, at that moment, I think their focus was not into diagnostics. So nevertheless, we, of course, were working in an area where we wanted a susceptibility test to be really fast. Of late, I think they opened their channel for other areas also. As Nandita mentions now, they have 4 major focus, and now diagnostics is also one of their focus. So we of course realized that, okay, this is something that would be the way to go. Now, why CARB-X? Of course, there are 2-3 major reasons that we thought, and like I do keep talking with Dr. Anand and CCAM. So we realized from that fact that, of course, the quantum of funding that CARB-X gives is good. And to move the project from stage A to stage B, if you have to, divide your complete funding into 5 parts, that complete 5 part is something which CARB-X has the potential to fund. So that was, of course, a good thought that, okay, this is a kind of funding that we should be targeting. Following that, we also realized that the kind of network that they bring, the kind of associations that they have. So Nandita told that they, have partnerships with NIH, BARDA. So the top agencies that actually work in the area of AMR and are way ahead of what the other organizations are. So that kind of, it was not just the funding part that was a focus, but of course, the kind of network, the kind of insights that they would bring. Now, when we saw that the companies that they funded are not typical startups, like not 4 or 5 people teams, they had, a mix of companies which were large organizations, and some were large enough to have like 1,000 people as an employee record. So that was a kind of concern that we had. Probably would they be funding a smaller company like us with 8 to 10 people working? But I think that was not something that they really bothered. What they bothered was, of course, the kind of the science which is being done, and what kind of impact would actually that science do if it actually translates out. So with those thoughts, we had a lot of constant interaction with the CARB-X team. They were very supportive, in answering all these kind of doubts. So it had, I think it has 4 stages, if I remember it correctly. We applied in 2018. So if I would try to remember, I think the first stage is the expression of interest, which is a 2-pager, where you just express that, okay, this is what we are trying to do. And we feel that this fits into your mandate, and this is a science which is exciting. If you are shortlisted there, then you move to the next stage, which is a short form. Short form is, I think, a 6-page application, which would sort of ask a little more detail. Now, at an expression of interest level, it is reviewed, if I think, by a lesser number of people, but as it moves forward, the review gets very stringent. So in the short form, you will get a lot of questions that you need to answer. And of course, short form is then followed up by a long form. So in that time frame, you have some questions. If you are able to answer those, do include that in the long form. If not, then you have to give your reasons that why this is a short time. The long form, once the long form is successful, which is, I think, more detailed form, for us, I think it was a 32-page form, but then it eventually leads you to final presentation, which for us, it was pre-COVID, so we had to go to the Boston University, and there was a panel of around 40 odd people who were in the room there, and few who joined online. So it was a very exhaustive procedure, but this process also helped us, not just improvise on our application, but also realize some of the strengths, some of the weaknesses. So the process is definitely exhaustive, and it took us almost a year from the first expression of interest to the final announcement of the result. An important part here is that CARB-X would need a 10% cost share. So earlier the cost share used to be 30%. Like if they are funding you for $1 million, then $0.3 million is something you have to bring to that project. Later on, it got changed to 10%. So this is what I mean. All the innovators would want to keep in mind, that if you are shortlisted, then that kind of contribution you'll have to bring as your take into the complete project. The other thing is that it is a reimbursement model. So you spend and then CARB-X reimburses. So of course, it's a different model, but the kind of visibility, the kind of funding, and eventually what happens next when you become a CARB-X member is the value. To mention here, I think in 2018, Kevin visited CCAM, and Dr. Taslim called me that you would want to meet him. And some of the pointers that I got from him really helped us, win the final pitch. So yes, CCAM also has a role there too, in our success in securing the funding. So that's what our experience and the whole process that we faced was.
Sachin, and we know that once they agree to fund a project, the technical term that the startups are known as other product developers. Yeah. So once CARB-X funded the project, how do they support their PDs or product developers? And could you share your personal experience so far and what lies ahead?
Right. So once the final announcement is made, then there is, of course, a long process of signing the agreements and everything. The one thing that usually gets everybody's attention is that you can put on your website that you are now powered by CARB-X. So that's a good liner to include, but eventually you get a lot of visibility. So that was one of the immediate attention that we've started to get. We got a lot of calls from a lot of MNCs who work into this space. So they wanted to do partnerships, they wanted to tie up. So that is what was an indirect effect of getting CARB-X funding. But particularly if I talk about what CARB-X does, so as we know that CCAM is part of the GAN network, and there are several others in different countries. So you get direct access to all these GAN members, and everybody has their own set of strengths. So in case of scenarios where we wanted few strains of organisms which were from US, so they connected us with some of the GAN members there. Of course, I think we will have the call from IHMA tomorrow, but CARB-X also has a good set of scientific and business development team, which they call as CARB-X support team. And they keep on interacting with you on a monthly and a quarterly basis to see where you stand. Are there any problems or issues that you are facing? If you want any kind of connections, if you want any kind of support. So that is something which I found really different from what we have been seeing in the current ecosystem. And I wouldn't say it as hand-holding, but it is like a supplementation of where you sort of feel there is a requirement of a particular area. So that was again very interesting. And overall, I think they keep a good track, and they would want to I mean, eventually every funder wants their teams or supported PDs to get successful. But here I felt, I mean, they really mean it, that if you are at stage A, you should definitely go to stage B, and they will try to do whatever is possible in their own capabilities to make you reach from point A to point B. So a good scientific support is what you get, plus a lot of visibility and a lot of other partnerships. We eventually, within CARB-X's network, there are some PDs with whom we collaborated. So there is a company which is like Antabio, which is supported by again CARB-X, but they work in development of new antimicrobials. So we tested their antimicrobials on our diagnostic platform. We forged collaborations. We raised funding around that. We made new use cases that if there is a new antibiotic under development, how can they be tested on novel diagnostic platforms? So it was all into a at many areas their support came in. And of course, the GAN network, again, because with CCAM, we have been associated from a very long time. So this, for those who are not directly associated with CCAM, through CARB-X as a GAN member, you can actually access all the facilities that are available and all the network that CCAM also has in the AMR area.
Swati, if I can just add a couple of points here. So I think what Sachin said is very valid in terms of once you get funded, but even before one gets funded, right? When he had applied for, say, the CARB-X fund thing, they actually work very closely with this thing, even for the funding application itself, and help a potential startup or innovator on how they should structure this thing. What is it requires to be focused on? Not, I mean, the CARB-X GAN, like CCAMP would also do that, but they take it to the next level because they know exactly, they get into actually the details of even the budgets, and they'll actually work with you and help the the company or the startup to restructure the budget. If they feel that something is we have underestimated something, they will point it out. Very few would possibly do that. They would point out and think this is you've grossly and they'll work with you to arrive at a rational number. So I would say CARB-X plays a very important role because it understands this space very well and what it requires to succeed, and they want you to succeed. I think that comes across very clearly, that they want you to succeed. So they will do anything that is in their thing to work with you to make your application also, thing. Of course, the final call and all that, they have lots of processes, systems and all of that, but they do prepare and get involved at an early stage once they've identified that this is within their mandate.
That's great to know, and definitely an edge above, because at the application stage, very few would work with the applicant to get it at a place where they think, it can potentially be funded. But as you said, the final decision is theirs after the submission. So we want to keep, some time aside for questions from our participants here. And Nandita, I already see some questions for you in the chat. So do have a look at them. We'll come back, to them, and we'll try to allocate as much as time as possible for them. But coming to back to you, Sachin, you have been part of both the CCAMP as well as the CARB-X ecosystem. How best would you suggest innovators and how to leverage these, and what would be your closing comments on this?
Right. So I think the best part of CCAMP being a GAN member is now that you have every detail of how the application should be or how everything should be structured. So that's, I think, the best part as of now for all the members who are interested to actually apply at this moment. Maybe you should get hold of Nandita's email and start following up. But yes, because we had access to both the networks now. So in our case, it was like we knew or were part of CCAMP's network earlier, and then became a part of CARB-X network later. So of course, a lot has been said about what CARB-X will do now and how they support. Particularly, if you are basing your innovation in India and targeting the Indian market, maybe CCAM will play an important role in understanding that how you position that product. One mandate, of course, of CARB-X is to support innovations into the LMICs, like low and middle income countries. So definitely understanding that problem and how do you position your idea, your innovation into that space is something somebody who has strength in the Indian context would bring in. So while CCAM will give you, global connects, but this is something I feel that you can leverage from the CCAM network as well. This is what we got to be helped by CCAM. We refine a lot of our products and changing according to the Indian context. Indigenization of all that happened at CCAM. So in short, maybe you of course should route your journey of applying to CARB-X through CCAM and then going to the CARB-X's network. And of course, if you're part of both the network, nothing like that. This is, I think, one of the best networks in the space of AMR you could get. So good luck.
So Sachin, thanks a lot. And I see there are quite a few questions for you as well. So while you go through the chat section to pick out a few, we'll request Nandita for her closing remarks. So Nandita, your word of advice to the startups and innovators who are looking to work in the field of AMR, and how can they reach out and be a part of this program?
So, Swati, as you know, we have been working even after you joined, and we sort of have been developing a lot of more, sort of widening our interests in AMR and other areas as well. But from a innovator or a startup or a company or anybody who's working to develop some products, what I would suggest is that to stay connected with us, because definitely CARB-X is one big and one huge and important part of AMR, which is an opportunity for our startups and our innovators to definitely leverage. But even because there are so many things, CARB-X focus is on escape. So we could certainly help them in evaluating and seeing how their first of all, whether or not, and if yes, how it aligns with CARB-X, and then guide them to, applying. Let me also say here right now that there are typically 4 calls in a year. Currently, there are no calls, funding calls as yet. The CARB-X has not announced any funding call as yet. We do not know when the next call will come, but yeah, certainly there is. There will be some calls, and we will have to look at what the call is for. It may not be for all the 4 at one time, or it may be, we don't know yet. What I mentioned about the 4 calls was what was happening until then. What we do know and what is clear is that the focus is on products or related to the escape pathogens. So my suggestion would be for them to stay connected with us, let us know of their work and what their plans are, what they would like to do, where we can then do an assessment and point out when an opportunity, it could be an CARB-X opportunity, or it could be an opportunity at CCAMP itself to either incubate or be part of our entrepreneurship development or accelerator programs. We would evaluate, and then they can join some of the programs that we have. So as Sachin said, stay in touch, keep asking us for whatever you have, and we would be happy to assess what can be done.
Thanks, Nandita. So now I think we'll take some questions from the audience. And we already have quite a few coming up.
So I'm getting somebody who's asking me on a direct message about what is AMR. So I would say AMR is antimicrobial resistance. Probably very, what one can say is that, global challenge because of the resistance that is developed by the pathogens to the antibiotics. And it's a huge challenge because it's difficult to develop new new products and new drugs that sort of will not outpace the development of resistance in the pathogen. Of course, I am limiting the definition of AMR only to the what in terms of today's meeting or context, but there are a lot of other related issues what we have discussed: surveillance, stewardship, and so many, One Health, etc. But I'm just limiting the brief thing to what the discussion AMR as we are talking about it today.
Yeah. Thanks, Nandita. Thanks for laying the basics of what AMR is and what it potentially encompasses. So, Sachin, there's a question I would like you to probably take. Does the investment done by promoter considered as contribution of promoter or not? And this, the question applies to the investment that has already been made. I think this is with respect to your comment on 10% being brought forward by the PDs and the rest. So would you like to answer that question, please?
Yes, so I think they really don't worry about where the 10% is coming from. It could be either the promoter's contribution, or if you have any investment already by an existing investor, you can use that money to show it as a 10% contribution. So they're really open about that. It could be promoter's contribution from investors. So in cases like BIRAC, if you know about program called as SIBRI or BIPP, that can also be used as a matching fund. So
but it has to be in your bank. You can't just show it as a it cannot be like a letter of support or something, right?
Oh yes, absolutely. You have to show that money, that you have X amount of money already with you. Plus, additionally, they also want to see that you have 3 months of operating expenses. So that also is something which you need to show. It's not just 10%, but how, because it's a reimbursement kind of a model, you have to show that usually their reimbursements are really fast, but in the worst scenario, if it gets delayed by a month or so, you have money to work around.
Yeah, thanks, Sachin. There's another question. I think this is more in terms of the modules innovations solution which was funded by CARB-X, and Jay wants to know that whether it's based out of an antigen antibody interaction or specific peptides. I think the curiosity comes from module innovation being the only diagnostics PD from India. So yeah, I think probably you could generalize it and elaborate as to
it is not exactly based on what we have written, but it's based on polymeric systems. So that is where the interaction and the specificity comes from. It's engineered polymers. It's a very different concept. It's not an antigen antibody or peptide based system.
Just adding to that, another question by Devarshi. Does the prototype have to be, is it required before the application as a, proof of concept, or a proof of concept is required?
Okay, so in terms of the level of readiness, of course, it cannot just be an idea. It has to be backed by some kind of work which has been done. In our case, of course, we did not have the prototype per se, but we had enough information to show that maybe in few months, we will be able to make the prototype. So that's during the due diligence in those 4 rounds, they want to de-risk all the possibilities that this might fail at some point. So the more the data, of course, the more it is useful and helpful for you. But they will definitely want to see some substantial amount of data. It cannot be just pure concept or very preliminary data.
Okay, and another question from the earlier question on contribution by the PD is whether already invested amount shown in balance sheet is considered as investment.
So if that amount invested is still in your account, then this could be considered. But if it has been spent for any other reason, probably this is something they would not want to consider. So that has to be reflected in your bank account, and they will want your bank accounts to be sent to them for verification. So you, at the point of sending those details to CARB-X, so this is again a part of due diligence. Until you show this, they will not sign the agreement, even if they have declared that you have been awarded. So this is important, and it, as Nandita has mentioned, unless it is in your account at that date, it cannot be shown as a contribution.
Okay. Thank you. I hope that answers the questions for quite a few who had raised similar questions. Nandita, next question could you take? And I'm kind of clubbing a few comments and questions here on the scope of the application and the areas in which applications are made. So from phage-based therapies to microbiota, is there a general guideline or a preference? Where do they get the information from?
Yeah, so yeah, there is, yeah, both of these are within the scope of CARB-X funding. As again, let me say this again, if it is escape pathogens. Where they get this information, they can go, of course, they can go to the CARB-X website. Everything is detailed out there. But also CCAMP would be happy to, if you contact, as I said, you email us, and then we could set up a call to understand exactly what it is that you are working on, and we could also guide them on what it is. I mean, just on the surface of what the questions are, yes, these two do fall within the scope of CARB-X. Detailed we can get into, and we can CCAMP can also provide more details. We can, if there is enough interest, sufficient interest, we could also do another webinar on just the scope of CARB-X funding if there is interest. So certainly we could look into that. But Swati, feel free to add anything if you feel related to the phage and thing, because I mean, I'm not sure if there's anything specific other than using phage as a therapeutic agent.
No, I think a lot of questions that are I can see in the chat are specific for certain areas that I'm, presumably the participants are working in already, and it'll be difficult to take each of them in this call. So, and we know that, the scope and the focus also for the rounds also changes a little bit. So what exactly are they doing, and what falls under the CARB-X funding rounds is something that I think it'll be better if you could reach out to us and we could discuss that.
Or we could do another one, just on the scope of CARB-X. We could do a seminar sometime in the later half of January. Mm-hmm. We could do one just on the scope of CARB-X.
I think that will be very helpful, because even we had some doubts that will this fit into what actually CARB-X is looking for. So,
yeah, so we can do that, Swati.
Yeah, and I would request my colleague Meghna, if you could kindly, take the questions from the chat and record it, so that we can also probably take it offline as well. Because it won't be possible to kind of detail them out during this call. But one question I would like to take, and Nandita or even Sachin, if you would like to answer this, is does CARB-X or CCAMP charge a mentorship equity for supporting a project related to AMR for refining their application? Sachin, I would like you to take this and then take it over to Nandita.
This was one of the best part. Maybe I can answer about CARB-X, Nandita can answer about CCAMP, but one of the best part about CARB-X is they invest in millions, but this is a non-dilutive funding. So they do not take any kind of equity in whatsoever way. Even of course, CCAMP doesn't also take any equity for mentoring. So Nandita can answer more on that. But from CARB-X's perspective, this is a non-dilutive funding and there is no equity charge or any kind of mentorship fees associated.
Yeah, so if it is related to CARB-X support or anything related to any CARB-X thing, we do not charge, we do not take equity, we do not charge anything, or there are, you don't have to pay any fees or anything if it is a CARB-X related support that we provide to the individual. But CCAMP has several other programs, as some of you may know. Let me just quickly recap them for people who may not. CCAMP has an incubation space. We also have technology platforms. We do several entrepreneurship development programs. We fund startups. through some of the government grants, either it is a DBT or BIRAC or DST or AIM or MIT. And in those cases, we do take equity where the scheme, it all depends on the scheme. So those funding schemes, some of the schemes, if they have equity, that may or may not be related to antimicrobial resistance at all. I'm talking general now. I'm coming out of the CARB-X scope and talking about CCAM of, about what we do. So we do take equity for some of the funding, possibly for incubation also, but I'm not very sure about the incubation. We do have an advancement program which we run for 1 year, where CCAM takes equity. I again would like to say that it is nothing related to AMR or CARB-X. It's a general activity that CCAM does. So for some of the programs, yes, we do take equity wherever the program demands. But for any CARB-X related support, there is absolutely no equity, no charge, no fee or anything of that.
Thanks, Nandita. And I think that you also answered another query that was there in the chat, is that does CCAM provide ground level funding to the players in India rather than big grants from CARB-X? So I think you've answered that question as well. Sachin, if you would like to take the question on, you've already kind of touched upon it, but in case you want to elaborate whether being a PD with the CARB-X gives you access to a larger network. Specifically, the question is for the BARDA network.
Yes, so I guess BARDA is also one of the support that you get through CARB-X. So definitely, yes, you can get connected to their wider network. Of course, I'm not sure if that wider network would be general, but if it is related to AMR, definitely you can get an access to their network. So there have been instances where companies were connected, even like BARDA, NIH, so you definitely get access. And they have, like BARDA and NIH, they support rigorously CARB-X. So yes, the answer is yes, you can access that network.
And another question regarding the application process, and maybe I leave it to Nandita, you or Sachin, whoever wants to pick this up, is when you have, a success rate of 92 out of 1163 applications. And as I, in the beginning mentioned, Sachin is among the very few to be funded by CARB-X and have that, be part of the successful cohort. How much transparency is there in case of the majority, that is the refusals that happen, is the question. So do you get feedback?
So I will let me
put it in a
general way, and then maybe Sachin can, because he's gone through the process. As Sachin explained, it's a 4-step process, right? So it's a expression of interest where you don't really reveal anything of your, it's a general statement where you think. Again, after that, what CARB-X will look at, they are really not concerned about anything. What they want to see is that if there is something which has a potential to, become successful, and this thing they will, and of course it's backed by all the thing, and they will do all the due diligence, they will fund it. So at the many of the cases may not go through the expression of interest stage itself. And 10 times out of 10, the reason for that is because it does not align with what their scope is. Very, very sort of fixed, and it's a very well-defined scope. And I would say most of the times, if it doesn't go through, and at the expression of interest, again, it is, I don't think you reveal much at all in terms of your IP or science or anything. Then with that kind of an information, nobody can, do anything. So most of the thing that doesn't go through is because of it doesn't align with the scope, and probably at the expression of interest stage itself. And then we come to, I think, the short form of the application. Again, here there is not much review. The most detailed comes only at the last stage, where is actually the presentation, where they do the presentation to the 40 odd, board members or advisory council members, or whatever, I think scientific advisory board, I think something they call that. Most of it happens only at that stage. And I think it's a very, the governance, this thing is, the level of governance is very, very high there. In fact, all of us who are involved with CARB-X, let me say this, since the topic has come, including me, every year we sign a COI document, which is is sent to CARB-X. Any conflict of interest, which means that even if Sachin, being a CARB-X PD, if I go to Pune and he offers me a cup of tea, I am not supposed to accept it. So that is the level of sort of, no, I'm serious. I'm not, it is very much that I cannot accept a cup of tea from Sachin or any of our product developers. So that is the level of, the checks and balances they have, and we sign this every year. So I don't see any reason for anybody to go down that route at all. If the rejection happens, it has got nothing to do with it is some thing which doesn't align, and I think we should just leave it at that and not read too much into any other, go down any other path.
Yeah, and I mean, they do provide feedback at every stage. So if they have some queries or some answers that they're seeking, if you don't answer that in the short form or the long form, probably at that moment your application will get rejected. So they review it very diligently, and Nandita pointed out very rightly, their governance is excellent. So of course there is no scope of any information leak and everything. However, I mean, if just to add on to the suggestions, if you have filed patents in your product journey, or if you have that might make your case strong. Of course, that's not which is a necessary thing, but if you have something like that, then that makes your case strong. Maybe an FTO analysis, even that would also be useful. So if you are going into that path, please try to structure your application in such a way that you have a scope for filing patents here and there.
Also, I think we need to, one thing probably we need to say is that though we've been talking about scope of funding, I think this CARB-X funding is only for the preclinical stage, right? It's not for, so yeah. Sachin, would you like to just...
Yes, Nandita. So, I mean, if it is for, of course, the antibiotic development, that is, you're right, it is a preclinical stage. But if it is for diagnostics, then it ends at limited verification and validation. So a complete prototype final validation verification is not in the scope of CARB-X. So of course that is also limited, but that is the last point where you can take from the feasibility of the concept till a limited verification and validation.
Okay, thanks. And there are a couple of questions. I think they are more in line with the incubation and the access to facility, which is available on the website as well. We encourage you to go and check out that information, which is available in the public domain. And the questions again coming up for other scope of funding through CCAMP, and as Nandita had already mentioned, yes, there are many. Many of them are not just specific to AMR, but other innovations also. Please check up the website. It has all the details of the programs that CCAMP runs, and there is possibility of receiving funding outside of the CARB-X round. So probably in the interest of time, we'll wind up with one more question. And Sachin, to you, taking that, is partnership or tying up with another organization to jointly apply in terms of as a collaborative project, is that viewed kind of favorably or not so favorably? And Nandita, you could add to it.
Okay, so
yeah, Sachin.
From my experience, I think if they bring in some complementary skill set or add to the overall application, that should be okay. But maybe in those cases, there are a lot of issues that what will happen eventually to the IP, who will own the IP, who will be the product, like project investigator. All those questions, they come up when there is a collaborative effort. So you will have to be very clear on all those questions. But otherwise, I feel that this should be okay till the point that it is adding. Maybe Nandita can have a more detailed answer here, because I am really not sure about it, but this is my feeling.
Yeah, sorry, Swati, if you could just repeat the question. Got slightly distracted.
Yeah, no problem. So the question was that is, a collaborative project where there are, more than one entity applying for the grant, is that viewed favorably or not so favorably in the context of the CARB-X grant?
Like 2-3 entities applying jointly?
Yeah.
Yes, basically as a collaborative project rather than one which is proposed by a single entity only.
Like 2 companies or a company and an institute, something.
Yeah, but I think there will have to be a lead, a lead in this who will, the lead sort of will, because they may not fund both. So they will identify the lead, this thing, and but I'm not very sure about this because we've never come across this. We could check back and reply to this person on that, because I'm not sure I know for sure how they do about
because
this.
usually in such cases, like if entity B is bringing something that could form like a part of a contractual activity. That is what I can see. And part of a fund could go there, and it can be explained that why this is done and why this much amount of funding would go to them, because they're trying to do some important part of the complete project. But even I have not seen an example like that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. So we could check back and let them know.
Sure. I think Meghna has kind of checked and, taken a note of all the questions which we could not take up during this session. And some of them were kind of very specific for the work that they were doing. So we would definitely reach out and try to answer to the best possible manner offline. No, we cannot share the numbers of the panelists, but Nandita, would you like to give away an email address where
should I just put it in chat so that you can please write to me. Let me just
and while you are writing, just answering one more question. Does 10% share is applicable for CCAM funding as well? Mr. Bansal, I think, yes. As Nandita pointed out, it really depends on the program. In a few programs, there is equity share, but in a few others, there is no equity share, or there's absolutely no fee or cost. Nandita, I would probably leave it to you to answer that question again. Although you did mention it, but if you could just.
So the question was the 10%, is it what?
Yeah, that is the CCAM funding also draw 10% share.
10% share of what? Like matching funds?
As an equity, I think he means more in terms of whether
maybe he can unmute and ask
for
the question, because
promoters share, he's saying.
I think he wants to.
Bansal, can you unmute yourself and ask that question? I think that will make it clearer.
Yeah, actually, I got to know that 10% is to be shared by the promoter. So just wanted to know whether it will be applicable in case of CCAM is taking the proposal.
No, 10% of promoter share goes to whom?
So I think the question is that because like in CARB-X's case, there is a 10% funding match required.
Exactly.
In funding schemes like CCAM, does CCAM also require a 10% matching? That is what I think he wants to ask.
So we do co-investment, but it's like a case-to-case basis. And if you're talking about, I think he's mixing up, because he's talking about promoters share and not about the matching thing. So if you're talking about promoter share in terms of equity, I think it's on a case-to-case basis and the valuation discussion and what the investment committee thinks. So there is no promoter's contribution. No, that is no. I think that so the grant is we don't. It depends on the scheme. For the big grant, we don't require any contribution from the promoter, and it is not CCAMP who has any thing. It depends, because most of the funding that we do is through government grants, so and government funding. So we are partners for that particular fund. So it goes as per whatever the government has mandated for the fund. So for example, I think SIBRI and some of these others, BIPP, they may require this thing. So if the government says, if the scheme itself wants a matching grant, then yeah, if the scheme demands it, then yes, but it all depends on the scheme. And promoters' contribution, yes, it is. It will be, I think, provided you are putting in, fresh money into the, at that point in time.
Yeah, I hope that answers your question, Mr. Bansal. And we're totally out of time. Before we close, welcome. Before we close, may I request everybody to switch on their cameras for a tradition that we have is take a photograph at the end of the talk, and my colleague Meghna will let us know when.
Please do look for your pictures on our on our Twitter, and share and like and etc. etc.
Yes, and Meghna, please let us know when we can stop smiling.
Good evening, Dr. Manish. How are you?
Yes, thank you.
Are we done?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Letting us know. We thank our panelists. So
thank you, Dr. Langaya.
I've also been gracious to share their email ID. So do definitely make use of that. We thank them for for their time and sharing their views and insights with our participants. And we hope this clarified quite a lot of your doubts. And thanks to our participants as well for being active participants and asking those questions. Keep checking CCAMP social media and announcement for more such enriching talks in the future as well. And do join us for our second talk in this series, which is at 5 p.m. tomorrow, 5 p.m. IST tomorrow, where we'll be discussing IHMA's offering for AMR innovators. And the link to that talk remains the same Zoom link with which you have connected today. So that's all from us. Goodbye and stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.